I've spent the last few years asking people about our world. And the story that I'm hearing is one of a fragile planet. One that seems to be facing many threats converging all at once. I'm told that we are not doing enough to avoid dangerous climate change. That there is a wealth divide that keeps growing larger. And I'm told that humans are causing an ecological disaster on this planet. But what I never hear enough about is why. Why have we ended up where we are today? And is there anything that we can do about it?
I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the 60s, deep in the Amazon, with the Shuar people, who were hunters and gatherers at the time. And I got very, very ill at one point. A shaman saved my life. And I ended up spending 3 years living with these people. And then in 1990, I went back to the Amazon and I said to them, you know, you saved my life many years ago, and now your forests are threatened. I want to help save your forests and your culture. And they said, well, that's nice, but if you want to do that, don't come here and try to change us. We're not destroying the forest. You are. Your people are. It's your oil companies, it's your lumber companies, it's your dream of the world. Because you in the North have had this dream of lots of cars, heavy industry, tall buildings, and whatever you give energy to, any dream you give energy to materializes. So this dream is materializing and you're now discovering it's a nightmare.
I had never really thought of our world as a nightmare. In school, we are taught about how far we've come as a species, how humans discovered fire, developed a complex form of language, and how our species evolved to be able to create tools in a way that no other animal ever had before. We learned to spot and escape predators, and we eventually built communities. Those communities of hunter-gatherers worked together to build a collective future. And over thousands of years, those communities became societies and cultures, and then civilizations. Through the agricultural revolution, our species exploded in population. We developed social structure and culture, discovered science, opening our minds to greater understanding, and with it developed medicine, improving our quality of life. These achievements gave our species the power and the responsibility of becoming masters of our planet. And I was taught that it was for these reasons that we were named Homo sapien, meaning the wise being. Wisdom, they say, gave us the ability to look long-term and weigh our actions against future consequences. But it also gave us the ability to ignore those consequences. I've started to ask myself if maybe wisdom has been a double-edged sword.
I think in the old days when the Industrial Revolution began, people didn't understand. But as soon as they began to understand, when they saw the poverty that was being created, when they saw how the environment was being destroyed, when we saw the horrible poisoning of air, water, and land, it didn't matter because they were making money. And then comes this ridiculous idea that you can have unlimited economic growth on a planet with finite natural resources. It's not possible.
And society at large is hitting a ceiling. You know, we've reached the ecological boundaries, and that's why big oil is going further and further into the most ecologically sensitive regions, the Arctic, the Amazon rainforest, you know, the Canadian boreal forest, and offshore, deep ocean. And it's this kind of desperation that, you know, will drive society to some kind of collapse.
But is our obsession with fossil fuels really something that could lead our society to collapse? The Industrial Revolution and mass adoption of coal, oil, and gas created the world that we know today. Manufacturing processes allowed our entrepreneurial spirit to emerge, and our standard of living improved in developing countries. It was really the beginning of modern capitalism as we know it. We exchanged goods and services for profit, fueling countries' economies. competition within the market's advanced industries and technologies. The bigger the growth, the better it was for society. I mean, just look at where we are today. Most of us are living better lives, aren't we? There's less violence, less poverty. I'm doing fine right now. Aren't you?
It is well documented that, especially in the United States, less so in other countries, that we are experiencing unprecedented levels of income inequality. We know in the United States that in the last 30 years, doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat, most of the government policy has shifted wealth to the wealthiest, to the top 1%. Corporate America and the corporate world is, I think, one of the biggest disappointments right now in our current economic circumstance.
Thou shalt seek the highest profit. That is the iron law of the corporate organism. And that's why modern industrial capitalism could be called a self-destroying machine, because this rule is a recipe for self-destruction.
I really don't think that we would have the technological advancements, the innovations, and the products and services that we have today if it weren't for globalization and modern capitalism. Yes, in order to have these goods and services at an affordable price, they must be produced at a pretty low cost. When I'm told about the horrible conditions that my clothes were made in, I tend to look the other way. I mean, isn't it beneficial to developing nations to have jobs like this? We hear arguments that these jobs are stepping stones to ridding those people of poverty. Just look at the wealth generated in countries like South Korea, China, and India. It all started with this type of labor, didn't it? And sure, there's been a lot of wealth concentrated into a small percentage of people, and I worry about that. But I guess deep down, I've always just believed that I would become one of them.
Greed, short-sightedness, violent forms of power are shutting the future, not just on the human species, but on all species on Earth. Mussolini, who was a dictator in Italy, had said the convergence of economic power with political power is fascism. We are seeing the birth of a new fascism, which is why we must reclaim the commons, those aspects of our lives that are vital to free societies and democratic societies, and societies which can ensure well-being, not just to the human species, but to all species.
We are a society that doesn't believe in the wisdom of elders, accumulated human knowledge. We think we're the best. We think we have nothing to learn from the past because, of course, we are morally, technologically, giant steps ahead of whatever went before. And that's just part of the entire self-delusion that I think has gripped the industrialized world.
And that's when it hits me. I keep hearing from our wise leaders today that we just aren't listening, that we are all aware of the challenges facing us, but seem frozen and unable to act. But if you look back in time, you'll see that wise leaders guided our species through many similar challenges, ensuring our survival through long-term thinking, compassion, and wisdom. They are numerous in history, sometimes described as heroes, sometimes hailed as leaders of religion, but they all had one thing in common: a care for the future of humanity. Now, when I ask people what future our species is heading towards, what world our children are going to be born into, I hear a simpler, more hopeful story. The future world for our species is one where we have earned back the name, the wise being.